We have now 40 participants. That seems like a good round number, so why don't we get started? Thank you all for joining us. I'm really pleased to see that we have a good turnout. My name is Mark Parsons. I'm with the League of Women Voters of Boulder County, and the League of Women Voters of Boulder County is hosting this forum on improving Boulder city governance through better elections. Personally, I believe electoral reform is one of the most important issues facing our society today. The health, if not the very survival of our democratic republic depends upon it. And of course, we're seeing all sorts of issues at the national level, but change begins at home. So we're going to be talking about whether Boulder needs electoral reform, and particularly the city of Boulder, and how that might be done. Sorry. Before we get started, though, I'd like to recognize that although this meeting is online, I want to acknowledge the land on which most of us reside. It's some of the most beautiful land on the planet, and it was stolen from the Cheyenne and Arapaho peoples by white settlers some time ago. Long before it was called Boulder, Indigenous people built a relationship with this land and stewarded it well for thousands of years. We must be mindful of that. I think we could learn a lot from how Indigenous people stewarded this land and governed its people. A little background on the League of Women Voters. We're a nonpartisan political organization, which means we don't support candidates or political parties, but we do take positions on issues, but based on study and consensus by the membership. We are working to make democracy work for all, for everyone. We envision a democracy where every person has the desire, the right, the knowledge, and the confidence to participate. And to note, the League is not for women only. Anywhere you are on the gender spectrum, you're welcome. And so we encourage you to join the League, follow us on Facebook, check out our website for upcoming events. We have a lot of events coming up, as the electoral season heats up. So we're gonna have 4 perspectives today, discussing the issue of electoral reform, and then we'll have a lot of time for discussion at the end. So we have 2 former city council members, Rich Lopez and Jan Burton, who are currently involved or have been involved in the past with electoral reform efforts. And then we have 2 experts in electoral systems, Celeste Landry and Marcus Ogren, that will be talking about particular approaches to voting methods. I want to start with some clarifications. So in today's session, we're talking about the city of Boulder, although the League, we're the League of Women Voters, League of Women Voters for Boulder County, but we're really focusing on the city of Boulder today. You'll hear the term ranked choice voting. Jan will certainly talk about it in describing our mayor initiative, the Our Mayor, Our Choice initiative. And Celeste will describe, talk about it in some multi-winner election scenarios. There are different interpretations and different meanings of ranked choice voting, and it can get confusing, but the basic idea is to rank the candidates in order of preference. The voter ranks the candidates in order of preference, and this can then allow for an instant runoff in a single winner election. That's what Jan will probably talk about, as well as different proportional representation methods used in multi-winner elections. So the term ranked choice voting is used a lot, and sometimes it has multiple meanings, and so I just wanted to clarify that as best I can. Also, I thought it was worth giving a little bit of background on how Boulder City Council elections currently work. So there are 9 members of the council, and it's a multi-winner at-large election. So a voter can vote for as many candidates as there are seats to fill. So, and then 5 city council members are typically elected every 2 years on the odd years, and the top 4 vote getters get 4-year terms, and the 5th vote getter gets a 2-year term. Boulder has, the Boulder City Mayor is chosen by the council from among its members. We have what is called, sometimes called a weak mayor or strong city manager system. So the mayor sets the council agenda, but otherwise is largely a ceremonial position. The city manager does the day-to-day work of running the city government and staff, and the city council then hires the city manager. So our agenda for today is to introduce the current structure of the Boulder City Council. I just did that. And then each of our panelists will have 10 minutes to present their perspective on what they see as Boulder's governance problems and what are possible electoral system solutions. We'll have a bit of time for some discussion amongst the panelists, and then some Q&A from the audience. As we discuss the issue, I want us all to try and stay focused on electoral systems. There are related issues which are worthy of mention, like council pay, but we want to keep them in the context of electoral systems. Also, if you've been reading the Daily Camera recently, you'll know there's been some controversy around the implementation details of the Our Mayor, Our Voice initiative, and how the city attorney has handled the whole ballot initiative process. And these are really important issues, but they're not what we want to discuss today. Like I say, let's focus on the general electoral systems and keep a somewhat long-term view and not get caught in the Sturm und Drang of contemporary politics. And then finally, as I mentioned, we'll have Q&A from the audience. We have a fairly large audience. We have 55 participants now. And so it's not going to be work really to have spoken questions. So please type your questions into the chat. Do that at any time. And then we'll have a couple moderators in the background that will be working through the questions and we'll pose them to the panelists. They won't generally say who asked the question unless you really want to be known. And so with that, I will start to turn it to our panelists. And our first panelist is Rich Lopez. Rich Lopez is a city planner and attorney. He has worked in the public sector for the city of Boulder, Boulder County, and Denver. He served on the Boulder Planning Board for 2 years, and in 1997, he was the first Latino elected to the Boulder City Council, where he also served as deputy mayor, what I think we now call Mayor Pro Tem. He joined the Denver Foundation in 2004 as a board member and eventually as a board chair. He's also served as and chaired the board of the Boulder Community Hospital, now Boulder Community Health. And currently, Rich is the board chair of the Calwood Education Center and chair of the Gold Hill Fire Protection District. So he's very active in the community. And he has played Santa Claus for over 20 years at Santa House and Indian Jack at Meet the Spirits. I'd love to learn more about who Indian Jack was. So with that, let me pass it to you, Rich. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to the League for hosting this event. I'm honored to have a chance to talk to you about my experiences a few years ago working on similar measures. When I was asked to be part of a team that was trying to craft this ballot measure for elections by districts, I was excited. When I was elected to city council, most of the council members lived west of Broadway, and almost all of them lived west of 28th Street. Gordon Riggle was the only person that lived out east. So in terms of representation, we were getting what I thought were sort of narrow views. Lisa Morzell lived about 2 blocks from me. Bob Greenlee and Spence Havlick lived in the same neighborhood and would carpool a lot. You know, it was very comfortable. But there were issues that were important throughout the community, and we really didn't have any sort of representation. So we sat down and crafted a ballot measure whereby we would create these districts or wards, if you will, and people would run for a specific district. That was really helpful in a number of ways. Instead of having to campaign throughout the city for your position, you would have a district that you could literally walk and get to know all the potential voters. That seemed like a much more logical and representative way of running. And the districts that are out east would have a representative. So that was the initial impetus for this. And we thought it was going to get a lot of support. We campaigned quite a bit. We solicited money, put out some ads, did everything we could. And I ended up being the spokesperson for the group, which was interesting. I felt honored until election night. On election night, I asked our 2 talented campaign managers, so how are we going to do? You know, because I heard some good things. And one of the campaign managers looked me straight in the eye and said, Rich, we're going to get creamed. And we did get creamed. It was 2-1, basically. And in retrospect, I think it was a combination of a direct election of the mayor and the districts that we were proposing. And it was a little too complicated. So I've already cautioned the proponents of this measure, but we were surprised to learn that there was a lot of support for the direct election of the mayor. And I still think it's a great idea. The ward system is also important. Your proposal will provide a bit different type of approach, but I think it's also important. When I was running, there were 6 candidates. There was, I think, 22 people running for office. 6 were elected. Will Tour got the highest number of votes. I got the second highest number of votes. And the numbers went down from there. And it really didn't, you had to take a look at the numbers. And my second highest number of votes was consistent throughout the city. Will's wasn't, but he still got the greatest number of votes. So what that means is up to the some people that want to analyze and figure out what might have happened. So I think it's a good approach. I think best wishes, as you noted. I'll mention, I don't live in the city anymore. I live up here in the mountains outside of Boulder. My ballots are real thin. My major concerns are for fire protection and outdoor education of our youth through Calwood, which is, as we know with COVID, has created a whole new world that we're just trying to cope with. So best wishes. I look forward to reading about your results or maybe watching it online. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Rich. So let me now pass it to Jan Burton. Jan is another former city council member who's also very active in the community. She chairs the Open Boulder Foundation and serves on the board for Better Boulder. Jan also chairs an organization called Create Boulder. I see a theme here, which seeks to ignite investment and participation in Boulder's arts and creative culture. And then especially apropos for today, Jan is a leader of the Our Mayor, Our Choice initiative, a proposed ballot initiative that would allow for direct election of the Boulder City Mayor. Jan is also a pilot and a small airplane owner, and is a very avid hiker and volunteers for open space mountain parks. And so with that, let me pass it to you, Jan, and if you want to share your screen, that would be great.
Okay, thank you so much, Mark. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right, here goes. First of all, thank you so much to the League. We really appreciate being a part of this session. We're honored, actually. Okay. I'm going to start off with a little context on governance issues. I will not concentrate on things that are not electoral oriented, but I think it's important to kind of have the big picture. As Rich mentioned, our council elections are at large using first past the post election system. And it encourages block voting or slate voting. And there is sometimes a spoiler effect. So what this means basically is about most city council people get elected with about 30% of the votes. So there is seldom a majority. And in regards to slate voting in 2017, for example, roughly 40% of the voters elected 80% of the seats, 4 of the 5 seats. So with our electoral system, you do have those problems. As Mark said, we do not directly elect the mayor. It's quite interesting that many people in the city do not understand that we don't elect the mayor. I've discovered that by my past 2 months of standing in front of grocery stores talking to people about this. And in fact, the top 3 city officials, meaning the city manager, the city attorney, and the mayor, are not elected by the people. I am going to bring up council pay because it's not representative of the workload that our council members put in. And then finally, I believe very strongly that Boulder's governance is impacted by the low level of participation, especially among younger voters. So I am a really big advocate of younger people being involved with electoral systems and with local government. Next, what are some potential solutions? First, ranked choice voting for council elections. And it's quite interesting that a lot of people, especially younger people, know about ranked choice voting here. And again, I'm talking from experience because I'm out there standing in front of grocery stores about 8 to 10 hours a weekend. Next is direct election of the mayor. As mentioned by Rich, it has been tried before. It is, in my view, quite a popular concept. Next is increased council member pay, examining wards or districts for council elections, and then eventually, we are not advocating for this, but someday we may look for a more powerful form of mayor. So these are potential solutions. So that brings us to the current ballot initiative that we are currently gathering signatures for. And I want to start off by saying, those of us who were working on this initially thought we wanted to do ranked choice voting with council. That was our highest priority because we felt like that would solve the biggest problems with our electoral system. Unfortunately, in the research we did, and we had sessions to review this with community members, people have a hard time getting their head around a multi-winner ranked choice voting system. So that's when we decided that since it's also a priority to directly elect our mayor, let's do that with ranked choice voting. And that way we can teach people what ranked choice voting is all about in a simpler system. So we have formed this group that includes 2 former members of the Campaign Finance Election Working Group and past people who have worked on initiatives such as term limits. We've been working on this initiative for about 10 months, actively collecting signatures in the midst of a pandemic for about 2 months. And I myself have talked to thousands of people about how they feel about local Boulder politics. So directly electing our mayor would be our first chance to do this, where people, we the people can vote for our mayor rather than 5 people on council choosing the mayor, using ranked choice voting, which would be the first time for majority voting. We have selected even year election, which will gain us 20,000 more voters. Remember, one of our goals is to involve more people, and then the mayor would get a 4-year term. Ranked choice voting is a simple concept in that you rank as many candidates as you want to. It empowers the voter to securely voice their values without having to sacrifice. If their top one doesn't get voted in, then actually their second place person their second place vote can make an impact. And it really is easy and compelling. And actually up to 10% more turnout is often shown with this. So how does this work? In the first round of voting, once the voters have selected their choices, if no candidate receives a majority, then the next phase of it is that the last the last candidate gets eliminated and their second place votes get allocated to the other candidates. So in the example that I'm showing here, if candidate B gets eliminated, their second place votes go to A and C, and then A gets a majority because of the second place votes. So it actually encourages more, let's say, even-keeled elections where candidates should even understand each other and maybe even try to gain second place votes for other candidates. So ranked choice voting is an improvement from plurality voting in that it is more fair because the winner must earn a majority of the support. It gives you more voice because voters can freely rank the candidates and secure from worries of vote splitting. And I want to give a very specific example in Boulder. In the last election, the coalition actually culled out some candidates so that we wouldn't have too many candidates that served in a vote splitting method. And it actually worked for us. And then finally, diversity and inclusion. In places like San Francisco, it has proven that more people of color and more women run under ranked choice voting, and they win. It is being used nationwide in many states, many municipalities. You can see the map here. Even in Colorado is being used in Telluride and Basalt. Other election officials and parties are considering it. The Denver City Council is considering it. So it is used nationwide, and it's been used for more than 100 years. So it is the most substantial alternate voting system out there. So again, proven over 100 years, recommended by leading scholars. It meets the National League of Women Voters position criteria and successfully used in Colorado. So again, just from a context standpoint, the timeline that many of us who are working on better governance in Boulder are considering is, first, let's directly elect the mayor. And if we make it on the ballot, I feel like there's very strong support of this in Boulder. Secondly, once we have experience with ranked choice voting, then we can use that for voting our council. Next is council pay. And then finally, then maybe we look, Rich, again at council wards or districts if desired. The thought is that ranked choice voting ought to solve some of the issues with a plurality voting system. But if not, we may need to go to councils or wards. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jen. And thank you everybody for being so good on time. I'm going to now turn it to Celeste Landry. Celeste first heard about better voting methods in December of 2011 at a League event, and the next year became a founding member of the League's voting methods team. She talks about voting methods to anyone and everyone. You'll know that if you know her. And likes sharing her passion about multi-winner elections. She has lived in Boulder since 1994. She, her husband, and 2 adult daughters all vote in every contested election when physically able to do so. So with that, Celeste, please take it over.
Thank you, Mark. Can you hear me?
Yep, sound good. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Mark. Thanks to all the panelists and everyone in the virtual audience for attending this panel discussion. I believe that Boulder's vote for 5 elections lead to a fair amount of competition and voter representation already, and therefore better governance than district elections would. However, we could have even better multi-winner elections, and I'll mention some options with ranking, rating, and weighting. So let's review the 2 types of, my screen's not advancing. Oh, there we go. Let's review the 2 types of council elections. Single winner ward contests are used in Louisville and Broomfield, and multi-winner at-large contests are used in Boulder and Lafayette, and then you can also have some of each type. That's what happens in Longmont and in Denver. And some advantages of multi-winner contests, one of the big advantages, which I'm not going to talk very much about, is that you eliminate gerrymandering. If you have no district boundaries, then you don't have to draw them, and you don't need an independent commission. You don't need labor and time. There's no controversy. A second advantage is that you have increased competitiveness. And when you have increased competitiveness, you have more voter turnout. Let's look at a couple of problems with single winner districts. Number 1, many district elections are uncontested. If you have only 1 person running, then there's no choice to speak of. And a candidate will win because they live in that district rather than because they have any expertise or ability. And multi-winner elections rarely have this problem. You usually have more people running than you do have seats to fill. And problem number 2 is that 2 good candidates can vie for 1 district seat, but only one of the good candidates can win. In a multi-winner election, the 2 good candidates both can win, and that's good for governance. If we look at Boulder City Council's elections, they're all single winner, and you can see the white rectangles here show the uncontested races. Poor Ward 3 has had more uncontested races recently than contested races. And the mayor has contests has had up to 3 people running, and that's good to have 3 people running. But if they're all good candidates, then the 2 who don't win don't get to serve in government. And in Boulder, we have 9 voter elected city council members, and the council chooses from among those 9 to have one of them be the mayor, and the other 8 get to continue serving. Let's talk about diversity in multi-winner contests. In the 2019 Boulder City Council election, if you look at the top 2 vote getters, one is a Republican and one is Black. Those are both minority groups in the city of Boulder, but they have representation on city council. Why would that be in our plurality system? Well, in a multi-winner plurality election, voters have some strategies that they can employ. One of them is you may only vote for one candidate because you really, really, really want that one candidate to be on council. Of course, this is not a viable strategy if you have a 2-candidate race. Another strategy is that you can vote for your favorite candidate or candidates, and then you can vote for some people who represent other ideas. And these are advantages of a multi-winner contest. And that leads into, you can use a voting method that promotes proportional representation, and you don't need to have those strategies that I just mentioned in the previous slide. If we look at the Boulder City Council Charter from 1917, that's when our city charter was written, we used a proportional representation method. This was before the term RCV was invented. They called it the Hare system, but it was a ranking method. And I'd like to read from this slide. This system ensures a real representation of like-thinking groups of voters instead of the present fictitious representation based on words. And proportional representation is the concept that one or more characteristics of a population are proportionally reflected in an elected body. Wards would allow for geographic representation. You may be familiar with European systems that do proportional representation by political party, but our council elections are officially nonpartisan. So we have to look at whatever the voters would choose as the characteristics which matter the most to them. And that can vary from year to year. This year, they may feel like affordable housing is a huge deal. We want renters on the council. Or they may feel like we have too many men and we want women, or whatever. And yes, included in those characteristics can be political ideology or geography. So when Rich was running, if somebody argued, as I've heard in Cambridge, Massachusetts, I'm from a particular neighborhood and this neighborhood is not represented, please vote for me, the voters could put that person as their #1 choice, and that person is more likely to win. And we have more polarization in Boulder these days, or at least it feels like that, and slates do make endorsements, and that can also guide how people vote. Let's look at this graphic here. On the left is the voter expressed preferences. We've got 40% polka dot, 38% green stripe, and 22% squares. And if you have a proportional representation result, then you get 2 polka dot, 2 green stripes, and 1 square elected to city council. But what you can get, and Jan alluded to this, is a block voting result, where even though only 40% of the voters like the polka dots, all 5 of the members elected to city council may be polka dots. And then 60% of the electorate would be quite unhappy. So just like when you're looking to buy a house, you don't usually buy the first house you see. You check out different houses, different neighborhoods. Similarly, when you're looking to improve elections, you should consider a variety of methods. So I've listed up here 4 different possible methods. There are others. The ranking method is known as Hare back 100 years ago in Boulder, or the single transferable vote form of RCV. These 4 methods listed on the left all promote proportional representation. There are also some methods that do not promote proportional representation, including an RCV method, so another reason to be careful with that term RCV. Let's look at a block plurality voting election. So you have 1,000 voters, you have 5 seats to fill, 15 candidates are running, 3 different slates,
2
Here are the
minutes left.
slates. Thank you. So 40% of the people vote a straight polka dot slate. And in a plurality block election, 400 is more than 380 or 220. Polka dot candidates sweep all the seats with 40% of the vote. And the poor stripe and square advocates are left with no representation at all. So single transferable vote is a form of RCV, and the thing that makes single transferable vote a proportional voting method is that you get a single vote, and everybody gets 1 vote instead of getting 5 votes in the previous plurality election. And then you also get to transfer that vote if instead of wasting it or losing it. So looking at this flow chart, if you look at the green triangles, this is if somebody gets if a candidate gets above the quota, that candidate wins, and they may have more votes than they need. So any of the extra votes that they don't need to win get transferred on the ballots to the next choice. So those are called the surplus votes. And then if you look at the reddish rectangles, if your candidate is eliminated because they got a few votes, your vote can transfer to the next choice on your ballot. And so there's less waste and you get a better proportional representation. So I'm going to start this election, single transferable vote election. I'm not going to finish it. But
You can wrap up here quickly.
Okay, you've got 1,000 voters, 5 seats to fill. In that case, the quota to win is 167 votes. And 400 people vote for polka dot, 380 for stripe, and 220 for squares. And in the first round, polka dot and stripe win. And then we transfer their extra votes over 167. And in that case, polka dot wins. And we've got 2 polka dot candidates and 1 green stripe candidate. And you keep going, you eliminate the lowest candidates, and now you have a square A candidate and stripe B candidate win. And that's where I'll stop. And I'm happy to take any questions later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Celeste. So now we're going to go to Marcus Ogren. Marcus is a member of the Colorado Approval Voting Chapter of the Center for Election Science, and they studied physics at CU. Marcus organized the Boulder Group for Effective Altruism, a movement focused on maximizing the good we do by promoting cost-effective charities and high-impact careers. Marcus is a math nerd with a strong interest in politics, so getting into voting methods came naturally to him. So Marcus, with that, please take over.
Hey, so I don't have a strong opinion as to whether or not we should directly elect our mayor. What I'd like to talk about is, if we want to directly elect our mayor, what's the best way of doing it? And these considerations will also be relevant if we want to have single winner elections for other reasons, such as with a weird system for city council. So as a motivating example, I'd like to talk about an election that occurred in Burlington, Vermont for the year. Now, this is liberal Vermont, so in addition to a Republican and a Democrat, there was also a progressive who was politically to the left of the Democrat. So the vote totals here, you see that the progressive and the Democrat collectively have more votes than the Republican, but the Republican still got the most votes overall. So if this had been done by plurality voting, the Republican would have won likely due to vote splitting. Fortunately, though, Burlington did not use plurality voting. They used instant runoff voting, the single winner version of ranked choice voting. What happened was the Democrat was eliminated here in round 1. There was a second round, and the progressive won with the support of the voters who had ranked the Democrat as number 1. I contend that this is a better result than would have occurred with plurality voting for the simple reason that voters tended to prefer the progressive to the Republican. However, this election is really interesting because while instant runoff voting resulted in a better result than plurality would have, it still didn't appear to result in the optimal result, for the simple reason that the Democrat would have beaten either the Progressive or the Republican in a head-to-head matchup, and moreover, he would have done it by a significantly wider margin. This is a result of what's called the center squeeze effect, where you have two extremists and a moderate, and the moderate would beat either extremist head-to-head because you don't want the wrong extremist to win, but the moderate still gets less first choice support, so the moderate is eliminated before they can face either of the extremists head-to-head in instant runoff voting. Another way of viewing this is that the Republican voters got penalized for voting honestly. If they had voted dishonestly and said on their ballots that they preferred the Democrat to the Republican, then the Republican would have been eliminated here, and the Democrat would have won the election, beating the Progressive. So, how can we deal with this center squeeze effect and do better? One very simple option is approval voting. You have the plurality style ballots that you're used to, very simple. The difference is that you can vote for as many candidates as you like. So basically, every candidate receives either a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Whoever gets the most thumbs up wins. Why is this good? That's because of how strategic voters will behave under approval voting. Let's suppose that there is a beat-all winner who would beat any other candidate head-to-head, like the Democrat in the last example. And let's also suppose that somebody else would win. In such a world, there's an outright majority of voters who would be better off if they voted for that beat-all winner in addition to whomever they prefer. So if the voters are being strategic and voting in a manner that will achieve the best result in our eyes, they will therefore vote for that beat-all winner. Now, there are some assumptions inherent in this. Voters need to be informed about what other voters are thinking, and they need to vote in a reasonably strategic manner. And there's therefore a couple ways things can go wrong. If voters vote for too few candidates, what you can have is some vote splitting. If voters vote for too many candidates, you might see a candidate who is deemed acceptable by 70% of the electorate beat a candidate who is absolutely loved by 60% of the electorate, and that's probably not what we want. My best guess is that the errors in different directions will tend to kind of cancel one another out, but still, there's no certainty. So, how can we do better than approval voting? One option is square voting. In approval voting, every candidate gets a thumbs up or thumbs down. In square voting, you can use an intermediate rating to say, he's pretty good. So, it's worth noting that in square voting, if voters are behaving perfectly strategically, they will give every single candidate either the minimum rating or the maximum rating. They won't use the intermediate ratings whatsoever. If voters do that, then what you get is exactly the same as with approval voting. On the other hand, if voters do use those intermediate ratings, what you get is significantly better, and here's why. The intermediate ratings allows the system to capture the intensity of support for different candidates. So if the difference between two candidates is pretty small, that's less important than where the difference is pretty big. So so when the voters vote honestly, you get significantly better results than with approval voting. The disadvantages of square voting: first, it is somewhat more complex than approval voting. Note that the ballots are a bit bigger. And second, if some voters vote honestly and some vote strategically, the strategic voters will wield somewhat greater influence. Can we do better than square voting? Here's an option: stir voting. That's short for square, then automatic runoff. You use the same square voting ballots as before. The difference is that instead of the highest squaring candidate winning outright. Instead, the two highest squaring candidates advance to a runoff. And in that runoff, you just look at the same ballots from before, and whichever candidate is rated higher on more ballots wins. There's a couple of reasons why this may be better. First, the presence of the runoff adds some measure of safety in that if a beat-all winner would come up in either number 1 or number 2, that candidate should win. Secondly, the presence of the runoff incentivizes voters to use those intermediate ratings so that strategic voters will behave far more similarly to perfectly honest voters. So how do these methods stack up? Note that this table is both subjective and very simplistic, but it still captures some useful things in my opinion. So I've gone over a lot of these factors with these voting methods. Note that instant runoff voting, again, is also known as the single winner version of ranked choice voting. But I'd just like to take note of how plurality stacks up. The one good thing about it is that it's simple. Only approval voting is comparably simple. In terms of expressiveness, how much voters can express on their ballot, it is absolutely the worst system. You can only select one candidate, no nuance whatsoever.
2 minutes, Marcus.
How does it do with honest voters? And in this case, honest voters are those who vote for their sincere first choice without regards to what other voters are thinking. It's again terrible. You've got elections decided by massive vote splitting. With strategic voters, you get a two-party system, of course. And if you've got honest and strategic voters, you still get a two-party system, only there are also spoilers thrown in, so it's even worse than that. Finally, I'd like to draw your attention to this bottom row. Voter satisfaction efficiency is a metric you get by running simulated elections with simulated candidates and simulated electorates. And you compare various voting methods based on how happy the simulated voters are with the results. Now, you'll note that in each case, there is a range of numbers. That's because how effective a voting method is depends on your assumptions for things like how strategically the voters vote, how many candidates there are, etc. But higher numbers are better. You'll see that star voting does the best, but at the cost of being relatively complicated. These two do a little worse, but are still pretty good. Instant runoff is also okay, and plurality is the absolute worst. So if you're going to take one thing away from this talk, please go with anything other than plurality. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Marcus. That's probably a good takeaway message out of everybody's talk, I think. So at this point, I'd like to give a little time for the panelists give a little time for the panelists to ask any questions of each other or engage in any discussion. Any questions? Jan.
Marcus, I was very interested to see all these different methods. I was not aware of them. And I did conclude the same thing you just concluded with, which was anything but plurality. Can you give a sense? I have heard, which is one reason why we decided to use RCV, is it had a lot of traction all around the country, and many places are using it. A lot of people, I mean, you find podcasts and you find information about it quite easily. How much traction do the other voting systems have in Colorado, for example?
Definitely less, I'll grant that. In terms of municipal elections, approval voting was just enacted in Fargo and North Dakota, and there's definitely less of a track record overall. Okay. In one sense, this is quite bad because it means there's less evidence to go on. And in another sense, it means that if we adopt one of the lesser known voting methods, we have a greater potential for leadership. And we can play a larger role in encouraging the adoption of that voting method nationwide.
I see. Thank you, Marcus.
Anyone else? You all are completely satisfied with what everybody said. I'm happy to turn it over to the audience. Go ahead, Celeste.
There was a question about whether some slides would be available afterwards, and I believe we are making them available afterwards. Maybe Jan, is that okay with Jan to make your slides available afterwards?
You okay with that as well, Marcus?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, okay, then I think I will turn it over to the audience. And so as mentioned before, please enter your questions in the chat. We've got some people in the background who've been monitoring the chat, and there've been a number of questions coming in already, but please, add more as you think of them. And so with this, let me pass it to my wife, Dory Parsons, who will pose the questions from the audience. Some will be to individual panelists, some may be to all at large.
Okay, so our first question that's come up a bit is to Jan. How much would it cost for the city of Boulder to run a mayoral contest in an even year election? Also, how about an election to fill a city council vacancy in an even year election?
Oh boy, how much would it cost? I don't know how much it would cost. And I do have to say that in our ballot measure, the most controversial part is the part that we picked about even year. And again, our objective was to try to engage more voters, because even year elections have in Boulder 20 to 30,000 more voters depending on the year. I will tell you that we are having discussions with the council members about conceding that point, depending on how this ballot measure gets to the voters. So it may end up being in an odd year rather than an even year. And cost, I would have to do the analysis on that. Thanks for the question.
Okay, the next question is, electoral systems which use at-large voting often allow one group to nominate seats, even though they don't have a majority. And courts have noted a lack of representation for minorities and required electoral changes, for example, to districts or to a proportional system. Systems which use wards and districts often lead to wasted votes, uncontested seats, and gerrymandering, as noted by Celeste. Is it time for Boulder to use a method like Cambridge, Massachusetts that guarantees proportional representation on the council? Which specific methods should be considered?
I can start answering that one. It's true that there have been lawsuits that have forced multi-winner at-large elections to change. And most recently, Lowell, Massachusetts and East Point, Michigan are examples of these. East Point, Michigan went to the kind of multi-winner proportional RCV method that I was talking about, single transferable vote. A lot of times people have implemented cumulative voting, which is very simple. I did not talk about it, but it is the most widely used multi-winner method that is not plurality block elections that we use here in Boulder. I think I didn't answer all of the question, but I don't remember the rest of the question. Cambridge, Massachusetts. Actually, there's on the League of Women Voters website, voting methods team page, there is a presentation that we've done about Cambridge, Massachusetts and their voting method, which is single transferable vote, multi-winner proportional RCV. They call it PR. You can imagine that's because it results in proportional representation. They've used it since 1941. So way before there were computers to do all the work. They elect 9 people every 2 years, and they choose their mayor from among the 9 elected city council members. And then they also use PR for their school board election, and they elect 6 school board members that way. Did I get the whole question, or?
Well,
Dory?
I think a version of that question was addressed to Rich. So could we maybe give him a chance to speak?
I'm gonna have to ask you to repeat the question. It was
Okay, it was
a
pretty
complex
long.
question.
Okay, so electoral systems which use at-large voting often allow one group to dominate, even if they don't have a majority. And courts have noted a lack of representation for minorities and required electoral changes, for example, to districts or to a proportional system. Systems which use wards and districts often lead to wasted votes, uncontested seats, and gerrymandering, as noted by Celeste. Is it time for Boulder to use a method like the Cambridge, Massachusetts system, which guarantees proportional representation on council? Which specific methods should be considered?
Well, I guess I have to differ. I mean, I still think wards would be a good way to go for the reasons I outlined earlier. What you see in a lot of the Boulder elections, there's, again, the slate voting. If you really want to make sure your candidate is elected, you use bullet voting. You don't cast all the votes. And I see some of these other systems having the same potential. If you really want one person to be elected, you convince everyone you know to cast only one vote. In terms of the gerrymandering, I haven't taken a good close look at the political geography of the city of Boulder. I mean, we will see a large population of students up on the hill, but until a few elections ago, they weren't turning out to vote. So it's important to, I think, consider that too. I'm still kind of favoring wards.
Okay, next question. Marcus, was the Burlington, Vermont issue you raised ever accepted by a peer-reviewed journal? Moderates often win in RCV. Voters in Fargo voted strategically in approval voting. Which methods minimize strategic voting?
Okay, as for the peer-reviewed journal, I'm honestly not sure. What I've done for studying the issue is to look at what all the sides are saying publicly in the accessible places on the internet and diving into their arguments, looking at the results of computer simulations. And honestly, I haven't checked to see what of that was cross-posted into a peer-reviewed journal. As for strategic voting, it's worth noting that it's kind of tough to define because there are cases, well, with ballot voting and approval voting, is that really strategic necessarily? I mean, a lot of the time, a ballot vote is a perfectly honest vote. I mean, if you strongly prefer one candidate to any other, it's totally in line with your preferences to vote for only that one candidate. And approval voting can work very well if something like 50, even 70% of voters ballot vote. That's been, again, shown through computer simulations. As for what is the most resilient to strategic voting, I would go with square voting on that, since voters have a strong incentive to use those intermediate ratings, and that makes the honest ballots and strategic ballots very similar.
Okay. The city council members must work together, so why not allow them to choose the mayor? They know more about what work the current mayor is doing outside of committees like the Denver Council of Regional Government, and can judge if they should continue so they maintain seniority in outside groups. They can also begin assigning people to outside committees so they will be better able to replace the current mayor. There was talk after the last election of having a female mayor, but the only 2 women on the council willing to do it had no experience whatsoever. Could people please comment on this idea?
Rich, you want to take that one to start?
Sure. At the last, during the last campaign, at a fun Meet the Candidates event, I had a chance to talk to three of the candidates, and I surprised a couple of them by saying, you do know your first, assuming you're elected, your first duty is to elect the mayor. Who would you elect? And they had a sort of like a deer in the headlights look. And they shook their head, and then finally they kind of pointed like this and pointed to someone who's running for re-election. It's really an almost unfair thing to ask of a newly elected person. You know, I think if there's a way to sort of follow what maybe boards have done, where you've had a chance to work with someone for years and you can determine whether or not they have a leadership style, an ability to include everyone in the debate and conversations, and they vote in a very seemingly fair way. I remember quite clearly the best person that ever ran a city council meeting was Bob Greenlee. And he could do that because he could count to 5. When people were talking on a particular issue, it was easy to figure out which way the vote was going to go if there's 5 people talking or interested in one side. And rather than listen to everyone drone on and on and on, knowing it was going to eventually win, Bob would introduce the motion or make the motion, even though he didn't support it, just to move the meeting on. So we'd make the motion, they'd vote, he'd vote against it, and we moved on. We got through our meetings in 2 hours. 2 hours, imagine that. So having a person with leadership and the ability to run a meeting is incredibly important. And that's really what you're striving for. You want someone that can lead a meeting, make sure all the views are raised. If necessary, ask someone that's been kind of quiet, say, well, John, what do you think? You know, you've been kind of quiet there. And it's always been my view that if everyone on a board or a council has participated in the discussion and made their opinions known, and a vote is taken, then it's probably a pretty good vote, even if it isn't the one that I supported. And in my years on various boards, I think that's proven true. And I've been real happy to see working with a group of people that actually do talk and express their views. So I think it's important, but the way we have it, the system right now makes it really difficult.
Thanks, Rich. Jan, I'm sure you have a comment on this.
I do. I will add to what Rich said. My very first meeting, my very first vote, I walked in and I knew I had to vote for the mayor, and wow, I mean, my heart was pounding because I had not made a decision yet. And, you know, I had a chance to sit down with one, but not both. It was gut-wrenching for me. And as a new council member, and let's face it, you have new council members in every 2 years, at least 1 or 2, maybe sometimes more. Like this last one, I think we had more than that, 4 actually. So it is, it's not a decision that comes lightly and not well informed. So if you have the chance, and also I find myself wondering, why is it fair that 5 people in this city get to elect or choose the mayor when we have a city of 100,000 people? So that's why I feel very strongly that we, the people, should elect the mayor. And that way, then we'll have some sort of a mandate, let's say, of what is important to us, because mayors will have to run, potential mayors will have to run on issues. And then the council will see for the first time a majority winner if it's done through non-plurality voting, and that council will get an indication of what's important to the community. So that's why I feel very strongly about this directly electing the mayor.
Great. Marcus or Celeste, do you have a comment on this question?
Sure. I mean, I accept everything you said about the new council members not being all that well informed, but aren't ordinary voters worse informed, honestly?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the stuff Rich talked about being able to run a meeting effectively, that is so hard to assess as an ordinary voter. So why are ordinary voters better at answering the question of general competence in running a meeting and stuff than city council members.
Well, I
Richard,
guess
Dan, go
yeah,
ahead.
I would say it's more than just running meetings. Obviously, running meetings is a big part of it, but they also are very influential in agenda items, setting agenda items for the council. And I do want to remind you that of the top 20 cities in Colorado, we are the only community that does not directly elect our mayor. So there are cities that seem to know that this works. So, you know, I think, and people say it is a weak mayor, strong city manager. Yes, it is a weak mayor, and we are in no way saying we should move to a strong mayor system. But the mayoral role is a strategic role for this city. And frankly, I think we've had some very, very good mayors. So this is not about have we had good mayors. And I also believe that women have had the same chance as men. If in the last election, women had a chance, but they did not care to run for the mayor. So it wasn't an issue of did the women not have a chance. So, you know, you can say the same thing about the governor or the president. Maybe we, the people, the population, make the wrong judgment. But does that mean we shouldn't get a chance to vote for that candidate?
I'd like to say something here. If you go to the National League of Cities website, they talk about different forms of city government, and the council manager form is the most common form of government. That's what we have in Boulder. And in fact, this form of government has grown from 48% usage in 1996 to 55% usage in 2006. It's most popular in cities with populations over 10,000. And so we can compare ourselves to the top 20 cities in Colorado, or we could compare ourselves to cities across the nation. We were the only city in Colorado that adopted the single transferable vote form of RCV. So, you know, maybe we're exceptional. I don't know. Just throwing that out there.
Okay, I think we need to move on. So, Dory, next question, please.
Single winner contests lead to more wasted votes than multi-winner contests. Why would we invest in another single winner contest for mayor rather than investing in improving our method of electing council?
I think that's a question for you, Jen, and I imagine Rich might have a comment as well.
Yeah, I think it's going to cost about $50,000 to put in a new voting system. And again, we looked at the acceptability of running RCV for council and felt like it was too complex. So since also direct electing a mayor was important, we felt like accomplishing both of those things at once would be a good thing. We would give the city plenty of time to put the new electronic system in, or the county, I guess, and then the community would get experience at running, at voting with a ranked choice voting system, which would then apply to the council.
Rich, did you want to comment on that at all? Okay. And just,
Well, I think, you know, directly electing your mayor is great. I mean, I don't, yeah, if you're, there are going to be some people that don't win in terms of, you know, votes cast, but, you know, assuming the greatest number of votes are cast for someone that eventually becomes the mayor, that seems fair to me.
yeah. So there's been a bit of discussion in the chat, and I think that there's somewhat distinct issues whether you would directly elect the mayor versus these electoral systems. I mean, I think what Jan is saying is that, you know, we're using this to introduce a new form of electoral system, but there's other reasons that you might want to be directly electing the mayor as opposed to having a multi-winner system. But of course, you can't have a multi-winner mayor, you know, so it's really a question of, you know, whether you want to directly elect the mayor or not. Dory, next question, please.
Switching from block voting to proportional approval doesn't require ballots to change. You still select which candidates you want to win. Does this make it easier to adopt than single transferable vote?
That sounds like something for you, Marcus.
It's multi-winner, so I think it's.
Oh, sorry, no, it's Celeste. All right, take it away.
I did not talk about multi-winner approval voting. There are a couple different ways to get proportionality using approval voting, and they all have to do with the tabulation. And the questioner is correct that you don't have to change the ballot except to say vote for as many as you approve of, which is any election administrator would be happy to, if that were the only change they had to do. There is a change in tabulation, which would require updated software, but it could certainly be done. It has to be adopted by probably a home rule city, and the software has to be purchased. And I hope I answered your question.
My thoughts on the viability of getting voters to support different kinds of proportional representation. Honestly, it might be slightly easier to explain something that uses a different ballot, because I suspect if you were talking about just a different tabulation method and with everything from the voter's perspective being almost the same, they're going to go, wait, what? So I think that with multi-winner proportional representation that it probably isn't such a big issue, but I could definitely be wrong.
Can I ask a follow-up on that? Moderator's privilege. Has there been any research that you know of sort of human ballot interaction, if you will? You know, we all think about the horrible ballots of the 2000 election in Florida, the butterfly ballots. Has there been, I would imagine there's been a lot of research since then on ballots that effectively convey what you're supposed to do. Are you familiar with any of that? And does that relate to your complexity column in your table?
I don't know much detailed empirical research. I believe that you do see slightly higher rates of ballot spoilage with ranked choice voting than with plurality voting, but honestly, you get over 99% of voters voting correctly in any case, so that might be a minor consideration in favor of something super simple like approval voting, but I don't think it should be a major consideration.
Okay, thanks. Dory, next question.
Okay. Commentary in the Daily Camera has asserted that the vote directly for the mayor proposal will result in 8 instead of 9 council members. Could you all please talk about that?
That sounds like you, Jen.
It does sound like me. That is a potential fact. So, and that is a result of our choice to do it in even years versus odd years. So, for example, if you have a sitting council of 9 people and they get elected in 2021, 2022, 3 of them run for mayor, 1 person wins, that means 1's a mayor, and there's no, in the system today, no way to replace that council member. So that is definitely one of the detractors of our choice to do it in even years, and that's why we are talking to council and considering making a modification of that if it goes on the ballot with council's approval. I also want to mention, because I'm kind of looking at some of these questions that are coming across, I have now I've spent, over 100 hours in front of grocery stores and hardware stores talking to voters. And there is a very high desire to elect our own mayor. Very high. I would say, 85, 90%. There are very few questions that come up. The kind of questions that come up are the ones that are being asked in the chat. I would also say there is a high interest in ranked choice voting. And in fact, many people say, oh, well, I care more about ranked choice voting than I do directly electing my mayor. So I was actually quite surprised at that. There is a higher level of understanding of ranked choice voting and a very high acceptance rate at that. I've never had anyone say, oh, I wouldn't do that because of ranked choice voting. There are a few people who say I won't sign my signature because of one reason or another, but it's never because of ranked choice voting. And I was pleasantly surprised the amount of knowledge about ranked choice voting.
Go ahead, Dory.
Okay. Marcus, why do you think that Lane County, Oregon failed to adopt star voting in 2018? And do you have any scholarly citations on star voting?
The answer to the brief answer to the first question is I don't know, and the answer to the second question is, again, that I don't know what has appeared in a scholarly journal. Sorry. I'm not sure how much you can really draw from such examples of voters rejecting such a voting system. I mean, maybe they failed to explain it properly. Maybe they needed a bigger movement behind it. And such difficulties are encountered by a lot of different voting methods. I mean, I gave the example of the election in Burlington for their mayor. After that election, they decided to repeal instant runoff voting, and sadly, they did it in favor of reinstituting plurality voting. I think that they could have made progress by going with another alternative voting method, but going back to plurality was just not the choice. But sometime, well, honestly, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that sometimes voters make bad decisions.
I'll chime in here for a minute. I think that the star voting people in Lane County were actually quite pleased with their result because it was fairly close and it was a brand new voting method, and it's hard to change. So this is a grassroots effort in Oregon, and I think more power to them for trying to make changes to a better voting method. They are trying again, and this time it's the city of Eugene that's going to probably put it on the ballot in November, and we'll find out sometime this month.
All right, next question. The National League of Cities describes Boulder's council city manager system as the most common form of municipal government in the country and getting yet more common. Quote from this website: among all cities proposing a change to their structure of government, the most common proposal was to add the position of Chief Administration Officer, City Manager. This professionalization of government administration also had the highest percentage of voter approval. It gives examples of cities far bigger than Boulder. Boulder adopted it during the progressive era 100 years ago. Why would Boulder want to go back to emphasizing a mayor?
Well, I guess I would like to take that one, and feel free to jump in, anyone. Our committee and our ballot measure is in no way, in zero way, de-emphasizing the role of the city manager. So the structure of the government would still be weak mayor, strong city manager, but the only difference is that we elect the mayor. So if you remember on my timeline, I said sometime in the future, and in my view, it's a very distant future, we could make a decision to go to a strong mayor. That's the type of government that Denver has, for example, where the mayor gets elected and he, at this time it's a he, runs the administration of the city. But we are in no way making that recommendation, and that is not what the voters will vote on. They will just vote on the same structure of a city manager type government.
Yeah, the city manager form is really, I think, it's an excellent form of government. I've worked both as a city employee and then as an elected and appointed official. And the caliber of staff that we have is usually pretty darn high. Boulder's a very attractive place. And whenever there's an opening for a job anywhere in the structure, they get a lot of applicants. And the professionals I've worked with throughout the years have been very well educated, very well experienced, and very professional. The problem I've seen from my view out here in the county is when some elected officials decide that they know more about flood control, for example, than their flood control engineer, or they know something more about design than the architect. I've seen city council members and planning board members redesign buildings, and they don't have any background in that. So the more you can rely on your professional staff to make the recommendations, the better, I think. And it's when, as one city manager used to say, some of the council members have gone to the mountain or gone to a conference and come back with a brand new idea that they want to implement. And fortunately, the city manager I worked with would tell me, Rich, we tried that in such and such city, 6 years ago, and it's not really that good. I think our system's better. So it's important to rely on professionals. They're paid really well. They work really hard, and they put up with a lot of second guessing from citizens to professionals to elected officials. So I think it's a great system. We've got great staff and throughout the organization.
I would agree with that. So really what we need to think about with this ballot measure is we are just trying to give a voice to Boulder voters. Hearing from a majority, and again, this would be the first time, for hearing from a majority of Boulder voters is really essential to sound policies. And the city manager, even in a strong city manager government, views herself to be the employee of the city council. So the city council, again, is not elected by a majority. The mayor would be. So this is a very strong voice for the community.
Two things I'd like to follow up on. Rich wrote a very nice editorial back in maybe 3 years ago about electing who should you vote for city council members. And I suggest people look at it, and it has to do with making good decisions and partly with the input of the professionals that serve in the city. And the second thing I want to say is there is no voting method that will guarantee a majority if you have 3 candidates or more than 3 candidates. So so I want to caution against using that word majority. If you have 3, this is what happened in Maine in the congressional district. The eventual winner did not get a majority of the ballots cast. It also happened in San Francisco in 2018 for the mayoral race. The eventual winner did not get a majority of the votes that were cast. So just careful with the word majority is my request.
And just to clarify a little bit about that, because I got confused about this when Celeste was still talking about it. It's a majority of the voters or the ballots versus a majority of the votes. So if you have multiple votes or if you're ranking on a ballot, that's different than the majority of the people. So you might have a majority of the votes, but not a majority of the people, if that makes sense. Is that a correct characterization?
You're talking about multi-winner. Multi-winner, we don't worry about majority, we worry about the quota. But
it's the same with ranked choice voting, that if you take all the second choice votes, it's possible that they have a majority of the votes with the second choice votes, but they didn't actually get a majority of the people.
Well, what happens is people don't rank every candidate, and so their ballot becomes exhausted. And sometimes you have 10 candidates running and you're only allowed to rank 3. So we can get in, let's not get in too much into the weeds here, but just be careful. You can't guarantee a majority if you have 3 candidates or more running.
And by that, you mean a majority of the voters.
Right. The
Okay.
people who cast a ballot, right.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Dory.
Next question, Celeste. This is timely. In a single transferable vote contest, why use the hair quota when most places use the droop quota.
Talk
And maybe
about
say what-
getting into the weeds. Nobody uses the hair quota. Let's all use the droop quota. I 100% agree. It was called the hair system, and I have to go back to see if they actually used the hair quota. Hair is named after Thomas Hare. We can move on to the next question. We can all agree droop is better.
Okay. To Jan, we would not want a new large public building that affects everyone, that everyone will use, erected in Boulder without going through a public hearing process and public input. The same transparency process we would want in government agencies and legislative bodies: public notice, observation, participation, and deliberation. Should also be applied to how our government representation is designed. Why did you design your proposal in secrecy? Wow.
Yeah, boy, we were really secret. Well, first of all, I would say I have a high degree of respect for the public hearing process, and that is done by council. I don't see that council has, they have not prioritized or taken the time to deal with governance issues like electoral systems, direct elect mayor, term limits. So it ends up being the people who have to do that. And one process that can work and does work very well in Colorado is the petitioning process. So it's just another way to get the voters a chance to vote on something. And I have a high degree of respect for this. Okay, so maybe some people were not involved in the planning process of any of the ballots that are on the ballot or maybe on the ballot in Boulder for this, but everyone gets a chance to vote on that. So in a way, it's a more conclusive public participation process than what city council is able to do typically, where they get 10% of the people who participate. So you look at the Bedrooms Are for People ballot measure right now. You might not personally like it, but more than 6,500 people have already signed it. So they have understood it, and they say it should go on the ballot. The same thing with the mayor. We will have probably close to 5,000 people signing, saying this is what we want to go on the ballot. So I really do believe it is a form of public participation. Thank you for the question.
Thanks, Jen. So we're going to wrap up at 1:30, so we have time for maybe two more questions or so.
Okay. A common complaint with approval and score voting is that in practice there really is a lot of strategic voting. Bullet voting for approval, minimum scoring for scoring. What is your opinion of those complaints?
I assume that's to me, and I don't think those are necessarily problems. I mean, if everybody chose to go with bullet voting or giving all but one of the candidates the minimum score, that would be a very big problem, since it would simply be plurality voting, and that's terrible. But I mean, just imagine something like the 2000 presidential election. What kinds of voters? What are the voters for whom it makes the most sense to vote for multiple candidates, and what are the voters for whom it makes sense to vote for exactly one candidate? It probably makes sense to vote for exactly one candidate if your first choice was either George Bush or Al Gore. It would have made sense to vote for multiple candidates if your first choice was Ralph Nader or Pat Buchanan. So even if it's only a small fraction of voters who vote for multiple candidates, you can still get tremendous benefits, and it still completely kills the spoiler effect.
Next question. How has Cambridge's voting system worked in practice? Does it broaden representation as advertised?
I assume that's directed to me, and the answer is yes. I was living there for a month in 2017 and did a lot of research. At that time, there was a Black lesbian mayor. She got elected again to city council after that. And the And the biggest vote getter at that time was a Muslim female lawyer. And she put her face on her signs, which I thought was interesting. Most people did not put their face on their signs. A Republican in one of the most liberal zip codes in the country always gets elected, maybe two, I don't know, but there's at least always one Republican elected to the city council, and Republicans are happy that they have some representation. I have heard people, their complaint is, this seems kind of complicated, but they also know that it promotes proportional representation. And so I haven't heard of any movements to change it recently, especially since they can now get election results on election night.
Okay. Do you recommend there should still be a mayor pro tem, and how should that person be selected?
I assume that's, well, go ahead, Rich or Jen.
Yes, definitely. You know, being mayor is a heck of a lot of work. Being mayor pro tem is also a heck of a lot of work. And being a rotating council person that comes in and helps maybe set the agendas is a lot of work. When I was on council, they used to deliver our packets by courier on a bike, and it was about that thick. Today, if they're going to deliver it in person, you need a pickup truck. So it's a tremendous amount of work. It's unbelievable the amount of paper or electronic paper that we ask our council members to go through and be familiar with. And, you know, it's a full-time job. You know, I kept track for about 3 months on my billing program to see, well, what if I bill the city for my time? And 3 months later, I looked at it and went, oh my God, what am I doing? You know, and, you know, it was an easy decision for me not to run again, because the amount of time you have to put in to do a good job is a tremendous amount. And at that time, my land use legal practice was picking up, and, you know, it just didn't make sense. So, you know, I think we need to, you know, carve down or pare down, you know, the topics to the really important topics that the city council members should be deciding. I think there's too much on the plate right now, but that's my personal opinion. So good luck to whoever gets elected.
Thanks, Rich. Jan, can you just quickly address the question as to whether your initiative addresses Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes, I agree completely with Rich. And our mayor initiative in the charter keeps the mayor pro tem role exactly the same with no changes.
Okay. So we're nearing the end of the session, so I'd like to give each of the panelists 30, 60 seconds to just give a final thought or takeaway message you'd like to leave with the audience. Anyone want to go first?
Can I follow up on the mayor pro tem question? Jan, does the mayor pro tem get elected in even years when the mayor comes on board, or do they get elected in odd years?
That's a very good question. I've never thought through that one.
Right now it's in odd years.
Yeah. I would have to think through that one. I guess, again, Celeste, we are talking with council because of the kerfuffle around the what's happened with the collection of the ballots and when they were due, or the collection of signatures. We are in the process of negotiating with council to refer the measure, which is what I personally hope will happen. And in that case, we are willing to make some modifications, and one of them would be to change from even year to odd year. So I would assume then it would happen when the mayor got elected, which would be odd years.
Okay, closing statements. Sounds like, Rich, it looked like you were ready.
Sure. The only closing statement I can make is vote. Any chance you have, get out there and vote locally, nationally, countywide. Just vote, please.
Amen. Who wants to go next?
Well, if you don't mind, I'll go, and I'll just say, first of all, thank you guys, League of Women Voters, for putting this on. I think any education around local elections is very, very important, and it tends to be the last thing that people think about. even though local government can be the most important in someone's life. I would say that, you know, I would hope that people will sign the ballot measure to support the ballot for directly electing our mayor. That is a form of your voice, is saying, let's put it on the ballot and let's vote on it. And I would also say that, you know, the reason we chose ranked choice voting is it is the most popular and widely used alternative system in America today. So thank you very much for including me in the panel discussion. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jan. Celeste, Margaret, Celeste.
I talked about multi-winner voting, and I understand that that is a big hurdle, but I also think it's a hurdle worth exploring. And so I'm grateful for this opportunity to talk to voters and interested citizens about multi-winner elections. Thank you.
Marcus.
I think that if people are thinking a lot about, do we want to have instant runoff voting, green choice voting, or approval voting, or star voting, or something, it's important to remember the big advantages of these over plurality voting, in that they help you elect your second choice if your first choice can't win. And we should also apply that thinking to the voting methods themselves. So please don't anybody let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
I think that's a nice way to wrap up, Marcus. And so let me also just offer my thanks. We had over 50 participants at some point. I'm really encouraged that we are trying to reform how we do elections in Boulder. And I hope you all learned a lot, and I hope you get involved more with the league. And we really thank you for your attendance. Bye-bye.